Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The war had dragged on for decades. No one remembered exactly when it started, just that it had been going on for so long that it felt like it had always been there, looming over humanity like a shadow. The Vraxian Collective, a ruthless alien alliance bent on galactic domination, had pushed humanity to the brink of extinction. Entire star systems had fallen under their control, and their technological superiority seemed insurmountable. Yet, humanity fought on, clinging to hope, defying the odds with every breath. At the edge of the galaxy, on a desolate, rocky planet known only by a string of coordinates, the galactic Ironclad prepared for what they knew would be their final battle. The planet was strategically unremarkable, but its location was vital. It was the last human outpost before the Vraxians would be able to launch their final assault on the core human territories. If the Ironclad could hold the line here, they might buy the rest of humanity the time it needed to launch a counteroffensive. If they failed, it would mean the end of the human race as they knew it. Colonel Marcus Kane stood on a high ridge overlooking the barren landscape, his eyes scanning the horizon. The air was thick with tension, the kind that came before a storm. Kane was a man who had seen more battles than he cared to remember. His once dark hair was now streaked with gray, and deep lines etched his face, testament to the years of war that had weighed on his shoulders. Yet, despite everything, his eyes still burned with the fire of determination. He would fight to the last breath to protect what little was left of humanity. Behind him, the members of the galactic Ironclad were busy fortifying their positions. They were a small but elite unit, hand-picked for their skills and courage. Each of them had proven themselves in battle countless times, earning their place in what was now humanity's last line of defense. The soldiers worked with grim efficiency, knowing what was at stake. "Colonel," a voice called out from behind him. Kane turned to see Lieutenant Sarah Holt, his second-in-command, approaching. Sarah was a striking woman, with short-cropped blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. She moved with the grace of a predator, every step purposeful. Kane had always admired her sharp instincts and unwavering loyalty. She had saved his life more times than he could count. "What is it, Sarah?" Kane asked, though he already had a good idea. "We've received word from command," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "The Vraxians are on the move. They're sending everything they have." "This is it." Kane nodded. He had expected as much. "How long do we have?" 2 hours, maybe less, Sarah replied. "We've already started deploying the mines and setting up the artillery, but it's not going to be enough. We need to come up with something more if we're going to hold them off." Kane looked out at the horizon again, his mind racing. The Vraxians would come in overwhelming numbers, with advanced war machines that could level entire cities in minutes. They had no choice but to rely on guerrilla tactics, using the terrain to their advantage, striking quickly and then falling back before the enemy could regroup. But even with that, it was a long shot. "We'll make our stand here," Kane said, finally. "We'll hit them hard, make them think twice about rushing in. Then we'll fall back to the canyon and hold the choke point as long as we can. If we can disrupt their command structure, it might buy us some time." Sarah nodded. "I'll make sure the men are ready." As she turned to leave, Kane called out to her. "Sarah, if we don't make it out of this, I want you to know, it's been an honor." Sarah paused, turning back to face him. Her expression softened, a rare moment of vulnerability showing through. "The honor's been mine, Marcus." They held each other's gaze for a moment longer before Sarah turned and headed back to the encampment. Kane watched her go, feeling a pang of regret. There was so much he had never said, so much he had left unsaid. But now wasn't the time for that. They had a battle to fight. The Vraxians arrived sooner than expected. The ground trembled as their massive war machines approached, darkening the sky with their sheer numbers. The ironclad soldiers braced themselves, their weapons at the ready. Kane stood at the front, his gaze fixed on the advancing enemy. He could see the hulking forms of the Vraxian walkers, towering above the battlefield, their energy cannons glowing ominously. "Steady," Kane called out, his voice calm and commanding. "Wait for my signal." The Vraxians drew closer, their formations tight and disciplined. They were confident, as they had every right to be. They had crushed countless enemies before, and they saw no reason why this battle would be any different. But the Ironclad was not like any other enemy they had faced. They were fighting for more than just survival, they were fighting for the very future of their species. "Now!" Kane shouted. The ground erupted as the Ironclad's mines detonated, sending shrapnel and debris flying into the Vraxian ranks. At the same time, artillery fire rained down from the ridges, pounding the enemy's front lines. The Vraxians were caught off guard, their advance momentarily stalled. "Fall back to the canyon." Kane ordered. The ironclad soldiers moved with practiced precision, retreating to the narrow canyon that would serve as their final stand. The Vraxians, recovering from the initial shock, pressed forward, determined to crush the human resistance once and for all. As the battle raged, Kane could feel the weight of every decision bearing down on him. The Vraxians were relentless, their superior numbers and technology slowly overwhelming the Ironclad's defenses. Despite their best efforts, the humans were being pushed back, inch by inch, but Kane refused to give up. He continued to direct the battle, ordering hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, anything to slow the enemy's advance. Every second they delayed the Vraxians was another second for the rest of humanity to prepare. As the situation grew increasingly dire, Sarah approached Kane with a grim expression. "Marcus, we can't hold them off much longer. We need to do something drastic." Kane knew she was right. They were running out of time, and they needed a game changer. "What do you have in mind?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I can take a team and infiltrate the Vraxian command ship. If we can take out their leadership, it might throw their forces into disarray long enough for us to mount a counterattack." Kane felt a knot form in his stomach. It was a risky plan, and the chances of success were slim. But it might be their only hope. "It's a suicide mission, Sarah. You know that." Sarah nodded. "I know. But it's a risk I'm willing to take." Kane looked at her, his heart heavy. He knew she was right, but the thought of losing her was almost too much to bear. "Be careful, Sarah. And if you get the chance, get out of there." Sarah smiled faintly. "I'll do my best." They shared one last look before Sarah turned and headed off to gather her team. Kane watched her go, feeling a sense of finality settle over him. This was it. The endgame. The Vraxians launched their final assault with overwhelming force. The Ironclad fought with everything they had, but it was clear that they were being overwhelmed. Kane could see his soldiers falling, one by one, but he refused to give in to despair. They had a mission, and they would see it through to the end. As the battle reached its peak, Kane received a transmission from Sarah. "Marcus, we're inside the command ship. We're moving to the control center now." Kane's heart raced as he listened to the sounds of gunfire and explosions over the comms. "Stay focused, Sarah. Take out their command structure and get out of there." There was a pause, followed by Sarah's voice, calm and determined. "We've reached the control center. Planting the charges now." Kane waited, his breath held. The battle around him seemed to fade into the background as he listened intently. Then, Sarah's voice came through again, this time with a note of finality. "Marcus, it's done. The charges are set. Get ready for the fireworks." Kane's heart sank as he realized what she was saying. "Sarah, get out of there." There was a long pause, followed by a soft, almost resigned sigh. "I'm sorry, Marcus. There's no time. But know this. I'm glad I had the chance to fight alongside you. Goodbye." The transmission cut off, and Kane felt a wave of grief and anger wash over him. But there was no time to dwell on it. He had to focus. He had to finish this. Seconds later, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield as the Vraxian command ship detonated. The shockwave rippled through the Vraxian forces, sending them into chaos. Kane seized the opportunity, rallying the remaining Ironclad soldiers for a final, desperate counterattack. With their command structure in disarray, the Vraxians faltered, and the Ironclad pushed them back, inch by bloody inch. It was a brutal, desperate fight, but Kane and his soldiers refused to give up. They fought with everything they had, driven by the memory of those they had lost, by the hope that their sacrifice would mean something. In the end, it was enough. The Vraxians, reeling from the loss of their command ship and the relentless counterattack, began to retreat. It was not a victory in the traditional sense. There was no celebration, no sense of triumph. It was survival, nothing more. As the Vraxian forces withdrew, Kane stood on the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen comrades. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and blood, the ground littered with debris and broken machinery. He felt a deep, aching emptiness inside him, knowing that they had won the battle, but at a terrible cost. The galactic Ironclad was all but annihilated. Only a handful of soldiers remained, battered and exhausted. But they had done what they had set out to do. They had held the line. They had bought humanity the time it needed to regroup, to launch a counteroffensive. Kane looked up at the sky, his thoughts with Sarah and the others who had given their lives in this fight. They had sacrificed everything for a chance, for a sliver of hope. And in the end, that hope had been enough. He knew that the war was far from over. The Vraxians would regroup, they would come again. But for now, there was a brief moment of respite, a moment to mourn the fallen and to prepare for the battles yet to come. As he turned to rejoin the survivors, Kane felt a sense of resolve harden within him. The galactic Ironclad might be gone, but their legacy would live on. Their story would inspire others to fight, to resist, to never give up, and as long as there were those willing to stand up and fight, humanity would endure. They would survive. They would find a way, because in the end, that was what it meant to be human. To fight against impossible odds, to face the darkness with courage and determination, to never surrender, no matter the cost. The galactic Ironclad had made their stand, and their sacrifice would not be forgotten. They had held the line, and in doing so, they had ensured that humanity would live to fight another day. The war would continue, but so would the fight for survival. And as long as there were those willing to pick up the mantle, the spirit of the Ironclad would live on. Kane took one last look at the battlefield before turning away. There was work to be done, preparations to be made. The fight was far from over, but for now, there was a brief moment of peace. And in that moment, Kane allowed himself to remember, to honor the fallen, and to prepare for the battles that lay ahead. The war would go on, but so would the hope that one day, it would end. And when that day came, the sacrifices of the galactic Ironclad would be remembered as the turning point, the moment when humanity refused to surrender, when they stood up and fought back. As long as there were those willing to fight, there was hope. And as long as there was hope, there was a chance for victory. Cain knew that the fight would continue, that more battles would be fought, more lives lost. But he also knew that as long as humanity had the spirit of the Ironclad, they would endure. They would survive, and in the end, that was what mattered. Cain took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the battle lift slightly from his shoulders. It was time to move forward, to continue the fight. The war was far from over, but for now, there was a moment of peace. And in that moment, Cain allowed himself to hope for the future. Hope for humanity. Hope that one day, the war would end, and there would be peace. And with that hope in his heart, Cain turned and walked away from the battlefield, ready to face whatever came next.